If you were caught in the middle of a battle between two ancient species of city-destroying titans, what would you do? These enormous creatures feed on radioactive energy, and after sleeping underground for millions of years, they're about to unleash a wave of destruction the likes of which no one could ever imagine. We're here to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the parasitic titans in Godzilla 2014. This nuclear scientist is about to have the worst birthday of his life. It's 1999, and a team of researchers from a secret government organization called Monarch have just made a shocking discovery. During excavation at a uranium mine in the Philippines, the ground suddenly collapsed, revealing a massive hollow cavern hidden beneath their feet, deep underground. Dr. Ishiro Serizawa here uncovers a colossal skeleton unlike anything currently known to modern science. And that's not even the worst part. Hanging from the ceiling of the cave are two enormous spores, and one of them seems to have hatched, with whatever climbed out of it burrowing straight through the side of the mountain, and leaving a trail of unbelievable destruction all the way out to sea. Meanwhile, in Japan, this nuclear power plant supervisor, Joe Brody, has been picking up unusual seismic activity in the area, and he's starting to get worried. If anything goes wrong at the plant, the results could be catastrophic for the entire world. So he and his wife Sandra hurry over to the reactor to get the situation under control, but that was their biggest mistake. Within minutes of their arrival, one of the tremors strikes the plant, and Joe orders the entire place to shut down immediately for everyone's safety. But there's a problem. His wife is already deep within one of the reactors. The tremor causes a breach, forcing Sandra and her team to run for their lives, as a wave of atomic destruction crashes through the tunnels right behind them, and there's no way to tell if they're going to make it out in time. Desperate to save her life, Joe sprints down to the lower levels so that he can manually seal the blast doors as soon as his wife makes it through, but he's risking exposing the entire city if he doesn't shut the doors in time. She tries her hardest to get out of there, but a tremor knocks Sandra off her feet, and she tells Joe to seal them in, knowing that there's no chance of her surviving. It's heartbreaking, and that's when Joe hears someone knocking on the door from the other side, turning around to take one last look at his wife as the automated doors slowly close her in. Okay, man, this is rough. Not only did Joe here probably just lose his job, but he also lost his wife. And the most devastating part of it all is that her death was probably his own fault. When he started picking up strange, seismic activity near the plant, there's no way that he could have ever imagined that it would have turned into an absolute worst-case scenario. But let's take a minute to see if we can break down where it all went wrong, and if there's anything that he could have done differently. Being a nuclear engineer is a great career choice, but in an earthquake-prone country like Japan, it also comes with its fair share of risks. For those of you who watched our episode covering Shin Godzilla, you might remember that Japan is the most earthquake-prone country in the entire world, when accounting for its size. That's because Japan is located directly on top of four major tectonic plates, which are the Pacific Plate, the Philippine Sea Plate, the Eurasian Plate, and the North American Plate. The interactions between these plates lead to frequent bursts of seismic activity, causing the islands to experience more than 1,500 earthquakes per year. Yeah, it's fucking crazy. Now, we measure these earthquakes using devices called seismometers that detect and record the vibrations in the Earth's crust, and calculate their magnitude using an updated version of the well-known Richter scale called the Moment Magnitude Scale. Yeah, how's that for science class? In fact, at the time of researching this video, the main Japanese island of Honshu was just hit with a devastating magnitude 7.6 quake, which released more energy as it happened than the atomic bomb that hit Hiroshima, and resulted in catastrophic damage to the local community. It's safe to say that Joe here should be more than familiar with earthquakes after spending a few years working here in Japan. But what stood out to him so much this time is that the readings showed an unusually consistent pattern that was always increasing in strength. He hasn't been able to figure out exactly what has been causing these abnormal patterns of seismic activity yet, but soon he's gonna realize that there's more going on here than your average national disaster. Now, the reason why Joe was so concerned here is because if this seismic activity were to compromise the structural integrity of the plant, it could result in unbelievable devastation to the local environment. Nuclear power plants are already built to withstand earthquakes using a carefully designed combination of reinforced structures, flexible foundations, and specially laid out safety systems that absorb and redirect any sudden bursts of seismic activity. This is usually enough to mitigate any accidents, but if enough damage is caused to the pipes, pumps, or other components that make up the reactor's cooling system, then there's an ever-increasing possibility that the core could overheat, risking a full-blown nuclear meltdown. And that is what those in the business call very not chill. A nuclear meltdown needs to be avoided at all costs, because it can lead to the release of radioactive gases and particles into the atmosphere. As gusts of wind continue to spread these radioactive materials, they'll quickly contaminate the air, soil, and water for miles around. There's no easy way to clean up afterwards either, because decontamination efforts may require years or even decades of complex, expensive, and time-consuming work. Humans who are unfortunate enough to be exposed to those radioactive materials can suffer from severe and deadly long-term health effects, and an increased risk of developing cancers. As such, the people from nearby communities may be required to evacuate if there's time, or else quickly take shelter in a safe location to try to minimize their exposure. While knowing this would probably make you not want to live anywhere within 100 miles of a plant, the good news is that modern nuclear power plants are equipped with advanced safety systems that will automatically shut down the reactor in the event of an earthquake, which should prevent a meltdown. Still, it's best not to take any chances, and that's why Joe here was in such a rush to take the plant offline the moment that he sensed any danger. Since he could clearly see the danger coming, it makes it even worse that Joe's biggest mistake here was sending his own wife right down into the heart of the reactor. He knew better than anyone else just how quickly that this could all go wrong, but he still sent her down there to check things out, all so that he wouldn't come off as crazy to his peers. He was so certain that the entire city was in danger that he was ready to shut the whole plant down from all the way back at his house. So why would he send the mother of his child into this obvious death trap? I wouldn't do that. With all of the technology that they have, he could have at least sent her in there with a Segway or something like a skateboard, so she could make a quick exit if this all went down. That's not to mention that today was his birthday, and the two of them should have been enjoying a relaxing day off somewhere far away from any nuclear reactors to begin with. This makes the saying that being a workaholic is bad for your health the understatement of the century. He may have prevented a global disaster, or at least that's what he thinks, but it definitely came at a heavy price. It won't be long before Joe finds out what really caused this catastrophe, and the truth is more insane than he could possibly imagine. 15 years later, Joe's son, Ford, has grown up into an executive ordnance disposal officer for the US Navy. He's spent his entire life trying to put what happened that day behind him and move on. But his father has been doing the exact opposite, immersing himself in conspiracy theories as he tries to make sense of the incident that killed Sandra and ruined his life. After returning from a 14-month deployment overseas, Ford is eager to spend some time with his own wife, Elle, and their son, Sam, at their home in San Francisco. But their reunion is suddenly cut short on the very first night when he receives a call that his father has been arrested for trespassing at the abandoned nuclear plant, which has been declared a quarantine zone by the Japanese government. Ford here is not happy, but he has no choice other than to hop right back onto a flight to Tokyo and bail the old man out of jail. Once they're back at his conspiracy board covered apartment, Joe explains that he's been picking up new seismic readings that are exactly like they were on that fateful day all those years ago. He was trying to get back to their old house in the quarantine zone so that he could recover the data to prove the similarities, and hopefully warn everyone before whatever caused the tragedy strikes again. The next morning, Joe says that he's going back in for those discs, and there's nothing that his son can do to stop him. Frustrated, Ford does the only responsible thing that a guy with a wife and child at home can do, and puts on a radiation suit to go with his dad on a field trip into the top-secret government quarantine zone. Once inside, Joe whips out his Geiger counter before suddenly taking off his gas mask. It turns out that this place isn't radioactive at all, and there's no telling what else the government has been lying about. After recovering the discs, they notice several government helicopters all converging on the supposedly abandoned nuclear power plant. But before they can investigate any further, a team of soldiers pulls up and throws them in the back of a truck. Instead of taking them back to jail, the soldiers actually take them right into the heart of the plant. That's when they finally see what the government has been hiding all along: a giant, pulsing chrysalis that's growing right out of one of the collapsed reactors. Every few minutes, this thing lets out an electromagnetic pulse that causes a temporary blackout all across the facility, and it's been getting stronger each time. Suddenly, the outer shell of the structure begins to collapse, as if whatever's inside is getting ready to hatch. The scientists quickly realize that they may not be able to stop this thing if it gets out, and so they decide to kill it by activating their emergency defense grid, bombarding the object with massive amounts of concentrated electricity. For a moment, it looks like they might have been successful. But that's when a massive insectoid creature emerges from inside and begins rampaging throughout the facility, destroying everything in its path. The EMP that it creates unlocks the door to Joe's interrogation room, and he runs outside to get a look at the creature for himself, but he's caught on a collapsing elevated walkway before his son can reach him to help. Taking cover in the back of the destroyed truck, Ford watches as the creature annihilates dozens of workers before sprouting a huge set of wings and disappearing up into the night sky. Now they know what really caused the incident, and it's just escaped to wreak havoc on the entire world. Okay, somebody needs to call pest control because these guys have one hell of a bug problem. It looks like their biggest mistake here was not taking this thing out the moment that they first discovered it. Later, the scientists are going to come up with the excuse that they didn't want to kill it because they were afraid that doing so would release deadly radioactive particles into the atmosphere. But now that they've got a 200-foot-tall parasite on the loose, they probably would have been better off hitting it with a massive can of Raid when they had the chance. After all, let's remember what we're talking about here. It's a giant, alien-looking egg that feeds on nuclear radiation, so it shouldn't exactly take Nostradamus to predict that this was eventually going to happen. The stronger that it got as it consumed more radioactive energy, the harder that it was going to be to take it down. So it's better to be safe than sorry and just vaporize the bug before it even ever hatched. Speaking of hatching, perhaps understanding more about this creature's life cycle can help us come up with a way to take it down. I know that I just called the thing that came out of it an egg, but the scientists specifically refer to it as a chrysalis, and that's an important difference. A chrysalis is the pupal stage of a butterfly. Throughout their lifespan, butterflies move through a series of 4 stages. They start out as an egg, which then grows into a caterpillar. The caterpillar eventually finds an appropriate spot to hang out for a while before transforming into a chrysalis like we see here. And then, once it's fully ready, it emerges as a fully grown adult butterfly. This means that the Muto here is most likely in its final adult form. And this might be good news. While there's no telling how long one of these things lives once it reaches adulthood, the natural lifespan for adult butterflies is fairly short, with the longest living species only sticking around for about 9 months or so, and the average examples making it only 2 to 4 weeks. With any luck, they might be able to simply wait this thing out if they can find a way to kill it, as long as they can stop it from having any babies. But, we'll get back to that later. In terms of taking the Muto down, there are a few approaches that the military might consider. We know that the creature feeds on radiation, so it has to find another source if it wants to maintain its full power. This means that they could predict its most likely path by assuming that it will be heading for any nuclear power plants, storage, or disposal sites that are nearby. Their best bet would be to try to hit it while it's over the ocean to reduce the risk of civilian casualties. But there is a problem. Anytime that they try to get near this thing, it fries their electronics with its secret weapon, an EMP. Anybody who's ever seen The Matrix, I don't need to explain this to you, but an EMP, short for electromagnetic pulse, is a burst of electromagnetic radiation that disrupts and destroys any electronic devices within its range. There are several different ways that an EMP can occur, but given that the Muto here feeds on nuclear energy, we can safely guess that it's creating this pulse through some kind of nuclear reaction. In the real world, if a nuclear weapon is detonated at high altitudes, a large amount of gamma rays released from the explosion interact with the Earth's atmosphere to create an EMP effect. Somehow the Muto must be able to achieve this same effect through some adaptation in its own biology. Since they rely on electronics to stay in the air, modern fighter jets aren't going to be able to get close, but it's still worth trying to find some way to hit the creature while it's still over the ocean and a safe distance away from any major cities. This could involve using dumb fire missiles with no internal guidance systems, heavy machine guns attached to old-school planes that don't rely on electronics, or even some sort of glider armed with timed explosives. Now that the Muto here is on the move, it'd be wise for the military to put all nuclear plants and waste disposal sites around the world on high alert and shut them down right away. They should also evacuate any civilians from the areas around these sites so that they can respond with full force if they need to, and try to give everyone on land as much time as possible to get prepared for an attack. Later, the Muto is going to go after a Russian nuclear submarine for food, which gives me an idea. It could be possible to use a nuclear sub to attract its attention away from land, and possibly lure it into a trap. Although, if the trap doesn't work, you're risking feeding the creature and making it stronger, so it's far from the perfect solution. If all else fails and they've got any giant bird kaijus that they've been hiding from the public, it's time to let those feathered freaks of nature loose, so that they can do what birds do best, and eat this bug. Otherwise, they might want to be able to find some way to bomb it with massive amounts of pesticides, since that seems to work well for farmers protecting their crops. As for Joe and Ford, there's not a lot that they could have done on their own to stop this thing, but avoiding being killed by it is a good place to start. The good news is that since the creature lives off of radiation, it's not actively trying to eat people, which means that if you can stay out of its way, then you should be fine. It's easy to get overwhelmed when looking at something as unbelievable as this, but I'd try to focus my attention on its legs so that I could avoid getting stomped on, and then just get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. I'd say try to steal a vehicle, but the EMP likely rendered all of them useless, so that would be a waste of critical time. It looks like their only choice is to just run out of there the old-fashioned way. But there's never been a better moment to have the most athletic day of your life. By the looks of things, they've already got their work cut out for them as it is. But they're about to realize that the Muto here isn't the only Titan who's suddenly coming out of retirement. A short time later, a military helicopter shows up to evacuate Dr. Serizawa, and he orders them to take Joe and his son as well so that he can talk to the man about his research. But it's already too late. Joe was badly wounded in the attack and dies from his injuries before they can get to safety, leaving only Ford alive to explain what he found. The survivors land aboard a US aircraft carrier, where the commander, Admiral Stenz, explains that they've named the creature Muto, standing for Massive Unidentified Terrestrial Organism. Its constant EMP attacks make it impossible to track with more sophisticated equipment, leaving them no way to know where it will strike next. Ford's father may be dead, but he'll have to save his tears for later because the world still needs his help. It turns out that all the way back in the 50s, the first nuclear submarine tests caused another creature to emerge, a skyscraper-sized prehistoric reptile who the scientists named Godzilla. Millions of years ago, when the Earth's radiation levels were at their peak, these creatures once lived on the surface. They were eventually forced to burrow deep underground near the planet's core, but as humanity began to experiment with nuclear technology, they returned. The scientists explain that they chose to contain the creature at the power plant rather than to kill it, because they were worried that doing so would unleash a lethal amount of radiation into the atmosphere. That's when Ford tells them that his father believed that the creature was trying to communicate with something using echolocation, but for now, they're still unsure what exactly it was trying to communicate with. After getting all of the information out of him that they can, the scientists send Ford up on a chopper to Hawaii so that he can start to make his way home, but it won't be long before he comes face to face with the Muto once again. Okay, now this is getting good. Let's compare these two titans to see how they stack up and if the puny humans have any chance at taking them down. First, we have the king of monsters himself, Godzilla, and there's a reason why he got that name. This absolute unit stands over 350 feet tall, which is taller than the Statue of Liberty, and weighs in at a gargantuan 90,000 tons, which is about as much as an aircraft carrier. He's also quite intelligent, able to adapt his strategies mid-fight to counter his opponents. The good news is that he doesn't necessarily want to harm humans, not because he likes us, but more because we're too insignificant for him to even see as a threat. With this massive size comes incredible strength to give him an edge in hand-to-hand combat. His extreme durability means that he can just take as much as he can dish out, and he was even able to withstand the direct explosion of a 15 megaton hydrogen bomb when they tried to drop one on him in the 1950s. When all else fails, he has his signature atomic breath to fall back on, giving him the ability to blast other titans apart with ease. And then we have our challenger, the Muto. He's a member of an ancient parasitic species that actually laid their eggs inside the bodies of Godzilla's dead relatives to feed off of their radiation. This guy is 200 feet tall and weighs about 15,000 tons. Not too impressive when stacked up against Godzilla, but definitely nothing to sneeze at. Like any parasite, the Muto's two main goals are feeding itself through atomic energy consumption and reproduction, which we'll get back to later. His EMPs make it impossible for humans to attack him with any weapons that rely on electronics, and the massive claws on the end of his legs enable him to deal lethal blows to his enemies. He's also extremely durable and incredibly strong, making him able to hold his own against Godzilla in a wrestling match. Males of the species like this one have wings, giving them great mobility in the air, and they're also very strong swimmers. As we'll see when they start going after military ships, they may look invincible, but they can actually be taken down with enough force, and have one major weakness that we'll discuss in a moment. Godzilla should wipe the floor with the Muto in a fair fight, but the bug is able to even the odds by using its flying abilities to give it the element of surprise. As for us humans, when it comes to Godzilla, they're about to find out that he's actually kind of on our side, so the best bet is to just stay out of his way. The Muto, however, has got to go by any means necessary. The only option when fighting something this huge is to aim for its weak points. Although on the outside it's covered in a nearly impenetrable exoskeleton, the inside of its mouth is left unarmored, leaving it vulnerable to attack. For the military, it could be possible to either trick it into forcing it to open its mouth, and then using explosives to hit it where it's weakest. They should also try to cut it off from any more supplies of radiation so that it can't get any stronger, and stick to weapons that don't need electronic components to do their job. It's safe to say that we've got our work cut out for us here, but there's still one more Titan that's gonna show up to the fight. Meanwhile, the military gets reports of a missing Russian nuclear submarine that mysteriously disappeared somewhere off the coast of Hawaii. They're able to pick up a distress signal that's strangely coming from the middle of the jungle on the island of Oahu, so a Special Forces ground team is sent in to investigate. And what they find is completely unbelievable. The Muto here lifted the whole ass submarine straight out of the water, and has been feeding on the radioactive material inside. Realizing that they can't keep its existence a secret any longer, the military immediately scrambles their jets, hoping to stop the creature before it destroys everything on the island. It seems like they forgot what the Muto here is capable of, because as soon as the jets get close, the creature stomps its foot down, creating a massive EMP burst that knocks them all right out of the sky, and takes out the power across the entire city, including the train that Ford is riding on. At the same time all of this is going down, civilians on the beach notice the water quickly receding out into the ocean. Terrified, they quickly start sprinting inland, thinking that they're about to be hit with a tsunami. But the truth is that it's actually Godzilla himself coming in hot for a city-destroying showdown. From the aircraft carrier, Dr. Serizawa can see the massive Titan on a collision course straight towards them. But Godzilla suddenly dives underneath the ship, passing below them without doing any harm. Unfortunately, the citizens on land aren't so lucky, because just his arrival sends a massive wall of water crashing through the city, and hardly anyone who's caught at ground level is able to get away. As a SWAT team fires off a burst of flares from a nearby rooftop, they finally catch a glimpse of the Titan himself walking ashore, but he's so massive that they can only see his legs. Even though he's shown no signs of aggression yet, these bozos immediately start opening fire with 9mm submachine guns, as if that's going to do anything to stop him. But Godzilla shrugs it off and continues marching towards his real enemy. Just then, the power to Ford's train cuts back on, and that's when they see the Muto walking down the track straight towards them. Leaning down, it takes a massive chomp out of the front of the train, nearly sending Ford crashing to his death. But he's able to hold on by grabbing one of the seats, and even saves the little kid who was accidentally separated from his parents. A swarm of military helicopters rush in and open fire, but the Muto knocks them out of the sky with ease, causing a massive explosion that terrifies the people on the ground. These guys are small potatoes for the big bug here, and now it turns its attention towards the real challenge, because Godzilla has just entered the battle. He gives the old Muto here a look that says, "This is personal," but we never actually get to see them fight besides a quick news report from the next morning that shows Godzilla chasing the bug back into the sea. It looks like Godzilla won this round, but it won't be long before Muto comes back to settle the score. Okay, I hate to say it, but the military is totally blowing this so far. They knew that the Muto could unleash an EMP, so why bother sending in jets and choppers just to get them knocked out of the sky? Instead, they probably would have had better luck sneaking in on foot and planting timed explosives near its feet while it was busy eating those nukes. One thing that they should notice is that the EMP bursts seem to come from its front legs. So if they can find a way to blow those off, then they might eliminate that part of the threat. As for Godzilla, they don't even know if he's intentionally trying to hurt anyone, so why risk making him mad by shooting him with MP5s? He swam right under the aircraft carriers when he could have easily destroyed them, so that's a pretty good indication that he's not looking to hurt humans at all. As a matter of fact, the only people who got hurt here were the ones who got caught in the tsunami, and they'd still be alive if the military had only warned them that a clash of the Titans was about to break out down at the Tiki Bar. My advice? Just stay out of Godzilla's way and let him handle his business. They're lucky that he showed up when he did, otherwise that Muto would have taken out everything in the military's arsenal. It's a rough start to say the least, and hopefully they rethink their strategy before the next fight. Next morning after the devastation, Ford sees that the military are going after the monsters and decides to join up. They're heading east across the Pacific Ocean towards the mainland United States, with Godzilla seeming like he's chasing after the Muto, and the military doing their best to keep up. Dr. Serizawa here thinks that Godzilla must be hunting the Muto, which means that if the creature wasn't trying to communicate with him, then it must have been calling out to something else, and soon they're gonna find out exactly what that is. Get this, after discovering the spores back in the Philippines, these geniuses actually took the unhatched one back to American soil. Think that's bad? Well, wait until you hear where they've decided to put it. At the Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Repository, way out in the Nevada desert. Remember, these things feed off of nuclear waste to get stronger. So needless to say, this was a bit of an oopsie. Sure enough, they quickly realized that Muto 2 here broke right out of containment, and she's about to go hit the blackjack tables on the Vegas Strip. While watching the footage of this new monster from aboard his ship, Dr. Serizawa here makes a game-changing discovery. This Muto doesn't have any wings, indicating that it's one of the opposite gender. This can only mean one thing: these parasites are trying to reproduce. This means that it's time for Plan B. They're going to put a nuke with an old-school mechanical timer onto a boat and send it out 20 miles off the coast of California, hopefully luring the Mutos and Godzilla in, and blowing all three of them back to the Stone Age. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, it looks like we've got another Muto, and that's a big problem. This one is a female, and although she may not have wings, she's standing at over 300 feet tall. putting her right up there with Godzilla in terms of size. Now, there's actually a way that Dr. Serizawa here could have predicted this early, but he missed a key piece of the puzzle that Joe was trying to warn them about. In his own research, he believed that the tremors created by the first Muto were actually the result of it using a form of echolocation. The scientists may have thought that it was communicating with Godzilla, but it was actually calling out to its girlfriend here. And there's a way that they could have figured this out ahead of time. The Muto transformed by enveloping itself in a chrysalis, which makes it most similar to a butterfly, or their close relatives, moths. These insects have ultrasonic hearing in order to avoid the hunting strategy of bats, one of their greatest natural predators. Although it's extremely rare, evidence exists that the males of a select few moth species use echolocation as a means of finding a mate, just like what the Muto is doing now. Joe had actually already caught on to this in his research, but unfortunately died before he ever got a chance to explain his theories. The answer was right there all along, and if they had known about the connection between these two Mutos earlier, then they might have found a way to use the creature's natural drive to find each other and reproduce to their advantage, or at least get prepared for the second one's arrival. It's too late for that now though, so hopefully Godzilla can help them put these bugs back into extinction before they wipe out every major city on the planet. After finally landing stateside, Ford talks his way onto a military train that's hauling the nuclear warheads down to San Francisco. But it isn't long before they run into a big problem. It looks like there's some kind of battle happening on the other side of the mountain, so Ford takes a squad to scout ahead before the train comes through the tunnel. Suddenly, the female Muto rises up from the mountainside behind them, forcing the soldiers to hit the deck. But it walks off back in the direction of the train, and they can see that it's carrying an enormous sack of eggs under its belly. Before they can get to safety, the train comes rushing down the tracks straight towards them, and the Muto takes out the bridge, leaving Ford with no choice but to jump into the raging river below. He manages to survive the fall, but all that he can do is watch as the monster swallows one of the nuclear warheads whole and lumbers away into the darkness. Okay, just when I was thinking that things couldn't get any worse, these guys had to go and make one of the most idiotic decisions imaginable. I get that their options at this point are limited, but that's no excuse for not thinking your strategies through. It looks like their plan just backfired in a major way, and whoever came up with this train idea, you f***ed up. Let's recap the decisions that they've made so far. First, they took this giant, ancient creature that they knew feeds on radioactive energy, brought it to American soil, and stuck it right in a nuclear waste disposal site. I don't even think that I need to explain why that was a bad call. Then, once the thing was destroying cities, they decide to take their greatest weapon, which also happens to be exactly what the Muto eats, stick it on a train, and drive it right across the creature's path. Was there nobody with a single brain cell in the room at the time that they were coming up with this? I mean, hello! All that you achieved here was door dashing this thing's favorite meal straight to it, and getting countless soldiers who just wanted to go home to their families killed in the process. Congratulations, everyone! Now Mama Muto here has a shiny new nuke to feed her babies. Why don't you just go ahead and level the entire city of San Francisco by yourselves at this point, since you're clearly just doing the Muto's work for it? There probably weren't a lot of other options, but come on! Didn't anybody at least think of the idea of putting the warhead in a box made of concrete or something, to help mask the radioactive energy that it's giving off while you tried to sneak the train through? It's far from the perfect answer, but anything is better than the absolute disaster that we have on our hands right now. Only the government could find a way to take a situation like this and actually make it worse. Sorry everyone, but you f***ed up. In the morning, Ford wakes up on the riverbank surrounded by bodies and rubble. Just then, the military pulls up to recover the remaining nuke, and he's able to hitch a ride out of there on a chopper. Meanwhile, in the city, Elle here is able to put their son on an evacuation bus. But since she's a nurse, she's forced to stay behind and help. The buses end up stuck on the Golden Gate Bridge, just as a squadron of Abrams tanks, battleships, and ground units, armed with rocket launchers, prepare for the showdown. And sure enough, here comes the big lizard just a few hundred meters out. The sailors see Godzilla hurtling towards them, but he suddenly stops just before ramming into their boats. That's when he begins to rise up out of the water, and they realize that what they were just looking at was only his tail. As he slowly breaches the surface, he creates a massive surge that pushes the ships away, causing their rockets to fire wildly off course. Panicking, the bus driver floors it through the crowd of soldiers, but one of the stray missiles brings down a piece of the bridge, blocking his path and forcing him to make an abrupt stop. At the same moment, the military opens up on Godzilla with everything that they have, hitting him with tank rounds, machine gun fire, and even a barrage of Tomahawk cruise missiles. But he shrugs it all off without so much as a second thought. In the chaos, one of the tanks ends up clearing a path, and the bus driver takes the opportunity to floor it once again, making it to safety just in time as Godzilla splits the bridge in half and continues marching towards the city. Okay, these guys really need to get their act together before they end up making things any worse than they already are. They keep trying to hurt Godzilla even though he doesn't ever attack them, and every time they nearly blow themselves up in the attempt. Since Godzilla clearly isn't interested in hurting people, then they should work together with him and use their weapons to distract one Muto while he goes after the other. Dr. Serizawa seems to be the only one who understands that Godzilla here isn't the enemy. And now they're about to risk blowing up the entire city of San Francisco and creating a nuclear disaster the likes of which the world has never seen, instead of using their best weapon and meat shield to their advantage. The worst part is that they don't even know if the nuke is going to work, but there's something else that they could try. Here's the plan. They need to strap some nuclear waste to a rocket and launch it up to the path of an orbiting satellite. Okay, follow me here. These things are essentially giant hunks of metal orbiting through space at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour. Perhaps they could lure the male Muto into chasing the food up into the satellite's path, putting the two of them on a collision course, and then splat the thing like a bug on a car windshield, leaving only the mama for them and Godzilla to deal with. It's a long shot, but if they're willing to nuke the entire city of San Francisco just to stop these things, then anything is worth a try. Now the military realizes that they need to manually shut the bomb down before the timer goes off, but the Muto's EMP will fry any electronics that try to get too close, leaving them with only one option. They'll have to halo jump straight onto the nest and get this done the old-fashioned way. Ford hits the streets and regroups with his squad, and they begin making their way through the destruction towards the warhead. Eventually, they arrive at the edge of the nest, just in time to see Big Mama here emptying her eggs into the crater below. Suddenly, they realize that they're caught right in the middle of Godzilla and the massive parasite. The two monsters clash, and Godzilla grabs the Mama Muto in his jaws, dragging her away into the darkness. With the coast clear, Ford and his team burst into the nest, where they find the warhead suspended by a pulsating structure made out of the creature's eggs. And there's less than half an hour left before it all goes boom. Up on the surface, Godzilla is putting the smackdown on Mama Muto, but that's when her boyfriend shows up for the sneak attack, and the two of them start kicking his ass all up and down the block. The soldiers can't get the case around the detonator open, so they decide that their only choice is to get the nuke back on a boat as quickly as they can. Staying behind, Ford knocks open the valve on a gasoline truck and climbs out of the crater just as a spark ignites the fuel, blowing all of the baby Mutos sky high. The Mama Muto is pissed, but that's when Godzilla shows up with his tail glowing bright blue, and he unleashes a burst of his atomic breath straight into the creature's face. It's a critical hit, but the male Muto swoops in from behind, just as Godzilla is about to finish the job. This time though, Godzilla isn't letting that slide, and as it circles around for another attack, he tail whips the bug straight into the side of a skyscraper, impaling it on a part of the building and finally taking it down for good. It's a major victory, but the fight leaves Godzilla exhausted, and he isn't able to get out of the way as the entire building collapses on top of him, crushing him under its weight. Meanwhile, the Mama Muto starts going after the warhead, which the sailors have finally loaded onto a working boat. Luckily, she's distracted by a squad of soldiers firing rockets at her from a nearby pier, buying Ford enough time to get aboard. There are only 13 minutes left, and with no way to open the case, Ford's only choice is to set the boat to autopilot as far out into the ocean as he can get. It works! for a moment, but just then the boat's engine gives out, and the mother Muto is standing over him, about to deal the final blow. All of a sudden, Godzilla grabs the creature from behind. With all of his remaining strength, he forces the creature's jaws open and shoots a blast of atomic breath straight down its throat, burning Mama Muto's head right off its body. Godzilla lets out a triumphant roar as he drops his entire enemy's body into the sea, but he collapses from his injuries now that the fight is finally over. That's both Mutos down, but there's still a nuke to worry about. With the Mutos out of the picture, Ford's boat kicks back on and begins speeding out to sea with him still aboard. He closes his eyes, knowing that he's about to die, but at least his sacrifice means that his family will be saved. Suddenly, there's a flash of blinding white light, but it's not the nuke, it's a military chopper, there to pick him up just in time. Moments later, the warhead detonates, but it's far enough away from the city that everyone else escapes unharmed. As the smoke clears, Ford, Elle, and Sam are finally reunited at a disaster shelter, and they're all happy just to have made it out alive. While recovery teams start working to clear out the rubble, Godzilla suddenly rises up and dives back into the sea, returning to his slumber now that the battle is finished. As they watch him go, the people finally realize that Godzilla was never a monster at all. He's an ancient protector of the natural order of life, and he'll return again when the world needs him most. I'm just going on about my life, and then all of a sudden these giant monsters are popping out of the ground, and it's a good thing that I've seen Godzilla movies before because I know exactly what I would do. Run in the other direction of where they are at. But that's just me. Let me know what y'all would do down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out the How to Beat playlist for more videos just like this one. What'd you guys think? Monster videos, right? We got more of them coming at you, so hit that sub button. Shout out to the team, the editors, the writers for making this show possible, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.